Supporters of Israel are coming together for a show of solidarity in Washington. Among those in attendance, you have Susan Rice, the president's national security advisor. Also, we saw just a little while ago House Speaker John Boehner at this event. This is put together by a group called the National Leadership Assembly for Israel. And often is the case, the United States right in the middle of all things Middle East. Here is Secretary of State John Kerry speaking a little earlier today.
Any process to resolve the crisis in Gaza in a lasting and meaningful way must lead to the disarmament of Hamas and all terrorist groups. And we will work closely with Israel and regional partners and the international community in support of this goal.
So John Kerry saying disarm Hamas, Hamas being the main power broker in Gaza. But let's talk for a moment strictly about the U.S. role there in this part of the world. So joining me, Crossfire host Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House, and also author and journalist Peter Beinart. He is a CNN political commentator. So welcome to both of you. And Newt Gingrich, you're first up at bat here. As we're talking about the role of the United States, let me just take it back to 2006. Israel had ended its Gaza occupation, tore down those Jewish settlements. President Bush pushed hard to hold an election there. Hamas won. How much of the problems, and Peter, same question to you in a minute, but Newt, how much of the problems now date back to that 2000 election that put Hamas in power?
Well, that's a part of it. It's been a bipartisan confusion about the nature of Hamas and the nature of this kind of a war. As long as Hamas is able to operate and retain their commitment to the destruction of Israel, you can't possibly have a peace process. And until they're decisively defeated, they're not ever going to give that up. So I think there's a real problem here. It's a bipartisan problem, as you point out. It certainly goes back into the Bush administration. It deeply, I think, affects the State Department's analysis, which continually tries to find, as they did over the weekend, by the way, with Secretary Kerry, who changed his tune today. But over the weekend, they were pushing for a truce that did not include demilitarization of Hamas, and they got very powerful pushback from virtually everybody demanding that Hamas must be demilitarized if there's going to be a serious truce.
Peter, is the demilitarization of Hamas possible looking forward as you talk about a permanent ceasefire? And also, do you think much of what they're dealing with today goes back to those elections in 2006?
Look, I would love to see Hamas demilitarized. I loathe Hamas. I was in Israel with my 6-year-old daughter for the first week of this war. We were in shelters. A Hamas bus bombing killed a close friend of mine. But there was a mistake in the question you asked. Israel did not end its occupation of Gaza when it withdrew the settlers in 2005. Israel's occupation has remained to this day according to the United States government because Israel controls access to Gaza by air, and sea, and with Egypt by land. Israel makes it almost impossible for people to export goods out of Gaza, makes it almost impossible for people to travel out of Gaza to go and study, for instance, or even sometimes for medical attention. This is also an important context of understanding what's going on here. Again, I take a backseat to no one in my hostility to Hamas, but you cannot keep 2 million people from having basic movement without expecting that those people are going to have very genuine grievances.
Speaking to somebody representing Palestinians earlier, he said, listen, Brooke, number one, we want peace. He was saying to me the number one priority is, to your point, getting access to the outside world, eliminating those border crossings, the two in Israel and the one there, the Rafah border crossing in Egypt. But Newt, we're talking Hamas. Let's also, though, focus now on, I want to talk about specifically President Obama and Benjamin Netanyahu, because they are, their relations, we'll call it frosty. Do you think too much is made of that?
No, I don't. I think that there's a enormous gap. And let me just go back to this question about access to Gaza. We now know that much of the concrete which has gone into Gaza, supposedly for humanitarian purposes, went into building tunnels under the border in order to attack Israel. We now know that Hamas may have accumulated up to 12,000 rockets in a period when they were supposedly being blockaded. So I think the challenge for the people of Gaza is, as long as Hamas is viable, it is virtually impossible to end the blockade. And I think this becomes a question for Palestinians. The difference is President Obama wants ceasefires, and the evidence over the weekend was that he was pressuring Secretary Kerry to desperately reach out for a ceasefire without demilitarization. Benjamin Netanyahu wants to eliminate the ability of Hamas to fire missiles and to build tunnels. And as Prime Minister of Israel, he has an enormous obligation to the people of Israel to try to protect them from what they've just gone through with well over 2,000 rockets fired into Israel in the last couple of weeks.
Go ahead, Peter. I know you were
respect,
shaking your head.
With all due respect, some of what Newt is saying is not correct. There are aspects of this blockade that have nothing to do with security whatsoever. Preventing Gaza fishermen from fishing more than 3 miles off the coast does not have to do with security. Preventing Gaza businessmen from exporting agriculture to Israel, the West Bank, is not a security threat. Preventing Gazan students from going to study in the West Bank or around the rest of the world. In fact, these things threaten Israeli security. They produce the very rage and despair that Hamas and other jihadist groups feed off of to continue their war.
Look, I'm not going to defend some of the aspects of the Israeli approach, but I would point out that even Egypt is now engaged in stopping things going into Gaza, and even the Egyptian government is more anti-Hamas.
Go ahead, Peter, respond. I know it's tough with the connection.
Under Sisi, Egypt is not a country that could care much at all for the Palestinians' welfare either. I would hope that we and Israel, a country that I love, would hold itself to a higher standard than the dictatorship in Egypt. I want Israel to defeat Hamas, but Israel is not going to defeat Hamas and get the Palestinian people to turn against Hamas unless Israel stops those aspects of the collective punishment of Gaza, which are not legitimate security means. And some of portions of this blockade, unfortunately, are not about security. In fact, they hurt Israeli security.
Peter, let me ask you this, because we know President Obama and Secretary Kerry both have decried civilian casualties. There have been many in Gaza. Both continue to emphasize that Israel has a right to defend itself. Do you think, with what you're hearing coming out of Washington, do you think Netanyahu, do you think Israel is happy with the support they're getting there?
I think that this military operation is very popular in Israel. Military operations in general tend to be very popular early on, but a military operation is not a substitute for a political strategy. Israel does not have a political strategy against Hamas. Its political strategy should be to show that those Palestinians who accept Israel's right to exist and practice nonviolence, like Mahmoud Abbas, like Salam Fayyad used to, that you have to make them winners. When you show the Palestinians that those leaders, like Abbas, get only increased settlement growth even after they have repeatedly accepted Israel's right to exist and agreed to prosecute the Palestinian struggle nonviolently, you are making Hamas's life much easier. To defeat Hamas politically, you have to make those Palestinians who accept Israel and practice nonviolence into winners. This government, sadly, in Israel has done the opposite.
Newt Gingrich, final thought.
Well, look, I think that to suggest that people who have fired over 2,000 missiles in the last couple of weeks, most of those missiles, by the way, designed as terror weapons because they're very inaccurate, and the only people they can hit are civilians. They're not anti-military. I mean, you look at the whole framework right now and ask yourself, if the United States had a neighbor firing 2,000 missiles into our country, what would our reaction be?
We're not occupying any of our neighbors. I mean, Israel's right to self-defense, but the analogy is wrong because America is not occupying Mexico or Canada.
Okay, but I think you put
far
too much burden. I think you put far too much burden on Israel and far too little burden on those who openly say they want to destroy Israel. I think that's an enormous challenge.
Peter Beinart and Newt Gingrich, gentlemen, thank you both very much.